Hello, one and all, and welcome to the podcast we call the Fantastival with myself, Steve Nussbaum. In the podcast, where I invite my guests to come on, talk to me all about their musical taste, their memories, their experiences, and they get to collect their fantasy festivals, which I have christened Fantastivals. Hope everyone is well as we are entering late February, and then the next podcast will be in March, which is just quite frankly unbelievable as 2023 continues to fly by. And before we start this one, I must say a massive thank you to Ben, the Magic Mod. He was my last guest. It was a great podcast, a real fun guy. He was so passionate about both music and magic, and you could tell that he was enjoying being on tour with the Brian Jonestown Massacre so much. So I hope everyone's enjoyed that one. If you've not listened to that one yet, please go back into our wonderful archives and give Ben's podcast a listen. So that was 119, and this is pretty monumental actually, 120 episodes now, and what a way to celebrate. What a guest I have for you on this wonderful podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to introduce the guitarist from the awesome band The Kynd. It can only be the one and only. It's Mr. Danny Tipping.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Danny, absolutely pleasure to have you on. I'm so glad you're my guest for 120. I'm looking forward to finding out all about The Kynd and what you have planned for the future. All seems very exciting. But before we start, Danny, I always like to check in with my guests, find out how they've been. So Danny, mate, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good, thank you. Yeah, it's been a hell of a start to the year. Been busy with the band and all things, family life, and things feel like they're returning to normal after a good couple of years. But yeah, no, I'm good, thank you.
That's great to hear. So I'll get into it with you first, Danny. I'll ask you, how did you first get into music? Was there a certain point which made you get into music?
Yeah, I guess it's probably familiar to a lot of your other guests, musicians, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners. There's always a lot of music in my house. I've got a twin brother, Tristan, who's in the Kynd. He plays bass in the Kynd, and my dad was a musician in the '60s, and we always had music in the house and guitars lying around, and we just took to it. It was just always there, and we listened to a lot of his music, and then like everybody in that would have been sort of in the early '80s, we're really into pop music. Just couldn't get enough. We had bought smash hits and watched Top of the Pops, and it just went from there. And then sort of finding our way into our first bands around sort of 14, 15. We were playing a lot of rock and roll covers, 50s and 60s rock and roll covers. That was our thing, sort of the early rock and roll and R&B bands, and sort of just learning our chops really, and playing as many gigs as we could, as effective as a covers band. And then we started all around the same time. This was members of the Kynd, effectively, or some members of the Kynd, started listening to more and more guitar music, and the guitar music that was coming out then, and we're really into sort of towards the end of the '80s, a lot of the Manchester bands, a lot of we were really into shoegaze. We grew up in the Thames Valley, so that whole shoegaze scene through there, the Rides and Slave Dives, Revolver, Catherine Hill, Chapter House, and we were really into the House of Love, and so we were absorbing all of that, and we were writing our own music, and so it just was just a long progression from our early childhood through the teens, and a love of music and guitars, and sort of that draw of being in a band. What's better than than listening to music? It must be playing music. We'll try that. So kind of very natural progression. I'm sure it's sort of a very familiar story for a lot of your listeners.
Imagine it must be hard to be in a band with your sibling, let alone a twin brother. Was that always the plan, Danny? Was it always, I'm going to be in a band with Tristan, he's going to be a bass player, I'm going to be a guitarist?
He just kept turning up at rehearsals. We've got very similar taste in music and guitar playing, and the truth of it was, at our drummer's house, there was a bass guitar when he got to it first, and that is literally. And he said, "Right, well, I'm the bass player then," because there was a bass. So that means I had to go and buy a guitar, and that was that. And that's how we, And my dad was teaching us, a few chords and just let us get on with it, really. Yeah. So there was no plan. And yes, we have all the usual sibling arguments, and have done, since we were first together in the '90s. But no worse than I'm sure any other band.
So I guess it's fair to say the Kynd obviously grew into quite a big thing, right? So you had quite early success
Well, yeah, it was all relative, I guess. But
Yeah.
so mid 90s, we were playing, all the usual venues up and down the country. Back then, there was a real university circuit. You could play, from one end of the country to the other every night of the week, playing in universities and SUs up and down the country. We, did all the usual Camden circuit and got a deal in 95, 96 and released our singles and then towards the end of the 90s an album. And, we were the sort of perennial Britpop support band, basically. And, a decent enough following, not a massive amount of support in the weekly music fest, which was, of course, really important back then. But yeah, I mean, we had a really good time. We really enjoyed it. As I say, the singles and album, did okay, but not much. We got picked up in Japan, which was amazing. But then every British guitar band got a deal in Japan in the 90s. So, and we worked with Andy Bell, who was a big hero of ours from Ride, who produced the our first studio sessions with an Ego Trip. Our first single came from that. So yeah, I mean, we thoroughly enjoyed it. But towards the end of the 90s, things just kind of petered out. There was a lot of delays with the record company. The record should have come out years before it did, and it just felt like we'd kind of run our course, and the band sort of drifted apart. And but we remained friends, and we've done a lot of other stuff musically since the Kynd, but we didn't never together. So we came back during lockdown to sort of start talking about the anniversary of our first single. It was the 25th anniversary of our first single, Ego Trip. We said, should we do something? Maybe should we do a gig? Or let's look at maybe re-releasing the album. Our album was called Shakedown, and it was available digitally, but had gone out of press. And the copies you could get on eBay were like 30 quid, which is, nobody should be paying 30 quid for a Kynd album, let's be honest. So we sort of put together a deluxe reissue of Shakedown with some B-sides and some outtakes and stuff. And as we were looking for them, so our singer Paul and Tristan and I were looking through our old boxes of mini discs and cassettes and some studio tapes, and we started sort of saying, have you got one of these? Have you heard this? Do you remember when we? And there was a whole collection of unreleased demos, mostly bits and pieces we were putting together for what would have been our second album at the end of the 90s. And we sort of started sharing them, obviously, because of course you can now.
Yeah.
And I'd send something to Paul, and he'd send it back with a mid-late in it, or he'd finish the chorus, and then he sent, he's still writing and recording songs, and he sent some acoustic tracks over with some vocals that he'd found in a lyric book from our sort of last rehearsal. He's got a big old notepad, and he said, we jammed this the last time we rehearsed back in the. And then, Tristan, we passed it around, and Tristan sent it back with some bass on it, and I, put some guitar and keyboards on, and we thought, hang on, that's sounding all right. And then as soon as we could get together, after lockdown, we had a couple of jams. We thought, well, maybe we'll do a gig for the anniversary, and they sold out. We did a couple of gigs at the Water Rats, which I'm sure you know, in King's Cross. And so it kind of snowballed, really. There was no plan. I'd like to pretend there was like, we know what we're doing. But it just went from there. And so we had this sort of almost a full album of demos knocking about between us. We thought we should probably do something with this. Yeah, and that's, it really just sort of happened fairly organically, actually. And certainly the Kynd don't do anything quickly or with any great amount of planning. So,
well, you said the second album had ideas for it. Well, it's done. It comes out very soon. It comes out on Friday, the 10th of March. You must be really excited about it. Is it all older songs, or have you got newer ideas together from it?
It's majority. Well, the core of the album are these songs that we sort of rediscovered in our archives, if you like. That were and we Paul sort of coined the term. So it was like musical archaeology, because some of them were. They're all in different forms. So there was fragments of some songs were kind of demoed, others were fragments like verse and half a chorus or just unfinished templates. So we sort of built those back up again, and we've added a couple of other from snippets of lyrics from Paul's notebook or a couple of ideas I had knocking around, and we sort of built up the 11 song set. So the core of it is very much what the album that would have been our second album if we hadn't split up. So, and that felt really, for us, it was good to have a theme and it's not a concept album, obviously, but a sort of concept for it. This would have been, and we're going to try and record it in the way we would have done, with all the influences and ideas we had back at the time. And of course, that's easier said than done, because once we got in the recording studio, you go, but I know how to do this now. So obviously that, it's the Kynd sort of 2.0. And we went back and recorded it in Bark Studios with a guy called Brian O'Shaughnessy, which is where we recorded our earlier stuff. And he's an amazing producer. It's worked with Primal Scream and My Bloody Valentine and Dodgy and Denim and just a whole load of people. And we were introduced to him by Andy Bell. And so we went back there to record it. It's an analog studio. It hasn't changed since the 90s. It's got all the old vintage gear in there. And that really sort of, for us, spoke to our theme of trying to, recreate this album as it would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it felt really good just to go back there and get this album done. So we're really happy. And it's, as you say, it's out on March the 10th. And you can pre-order that from our Bandcamp page. And we've got really nice limited edition vinyl package and CDs and all the usual stuff.
All the usual stuff. It sounds really nice, Danny. It seems like it's come very full circle for you and the band in a really nice way. And before that comes out, you got a single which will be released by the time this goes out. So you got the older single that comes out on Friday.
Yeah. So in December we released the first single of the album, was Whispers and Tones, and then which for us was like very much sounded like the old Kynd and what people might expect to hear. And then Older, which is the single that will have come out on the 24th of February, is sort of moves the sound on a little bit, and we're really pleased that's out. That's out now, and you can listen to that, stream that on all the usual platforms.
And in terms of live dates, and I'm well aware you've got a big kind of launch party on the 9th of March at 93 Feet East, which is a great venue.
Yeah.
And I guess you must be really looking forward to that and getting to play the album.
Oh, we can't wait. It's for the whole of our, obviously with a huge hiatus in the middle, we've been promoting the singles and the album that we released back then, and now we can play this whole new set of songs off this new album. We can't wait, and tickets are selling really well. We're going to see a lot of old friends there, and so we're really looking forward to the 9th of March, and that's our big focus at the moment, although we will shortly afterwards be announcing some other dates, but we're just trying to keep people focused on the album launch at the moment.
Great to hear. So if people aren't following you, Danny, and obviously in this day and age, social media is a massive, big thing. Obviously, it wasn't back then, first time around, but this time it is.
I didn't even have a mobile phone when we were in the Kynd.
So where do people find the Kynd? And if someone's listening to this podcast and goes, I'm going to go and follow, where would people find the Kynd and how would people follow them?
Yeah, so firstly, it's the Kynd with a Y, so Kynd, which is obviously makes it even more difficult to find us. But so it's the Kynd. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm pretty sure there's a TikTok channel somewhere, and Spotify, all the usual places. So if you search for the Kynd, you'll find us there.
So you've mentioned pop music, you mentioned 50s and 60s, playing that kind of music. But Danny, what kind of music are you into personally? What music does it for you?
Obviously, I genuinely, I'm sure everybody says I've got a very broad music taste, and as a band we share a quite broad and varied music taste. But I love, and you can probably hear this in our music, I love the music of the 60s and 70s. Obviously the Byrds and the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan, and then right through the whole history of guitar music. All of us are closet shoegazers. That the guitar bands of the late 80s and early 90s that I mentioned earlier, the Rides and Revolvers and Slow Dive, and classic guitar bands. We're all big fans of Blur, and bands like American bands like we love REM, the early REM albums, Pavement, Dinosaur Jr. We were just absorbing it all, and have continued to do so now. So classic rock, 60s pop, and indie music. But again, we listen to a broad range.
Sounds like an awesome combination to be listening to. Is there anything at the moment, Danny, that you're listening to? So I went to see Jesse Marlin at the Garage on Friday. He's just released his 20th.
I love Jesse Marlin.
I saw him. I've seen him so many times. He played his 20th anniversary show for his debut album, The Fine Art of Self-Destruction. So I've been delving back into that album this week. Is there anything you're listening to this week, whether that's new or old?
I'll tell you what, there's a few things. I really like the Wave album, the Graham Coxon album that he's done with his partner. I don't know if you heard that. That's I'm really enjoying that. And I've just quickly picked up my phone because there was a band. I don't know if you ever listened to the Britpop Revival show that Nick does on on Phonic. He always has a new band of the week, and there's a band from Costa Rica whose name I'm just reminding myself of, called Las Robertas. So that's Las, Las, Robertas, Robertas. And they're from Costa Rica. They've got a new album out that's produced by Owen Morris, who did all the early Oasis stuff. Yeah. Owen lives in Costa Rica now, and he saw them playing in a band and offered to produce them. He's retired, apparently, And I heard a track on the Britpop Bible show last week, and I've been playing their album non-stop. It's like it's kind of like early mid-period Oasis Verve musically, but vocally, female lead vocal and harmonies, quite shoegazy. So like early Lush, but with a rocking backing. So Las Robertas is my tip for this week. The album's called Love Is the Answer.
I'm definitely going to check that out. It sounds fantastic. It's not one I've heard before, but it sounds great. And this is what this podcast is all about, getting people to listen to different music that they might not have listened to in the first place. So, Danny, let me take you back then to when you was a young chap, had some money in your pocket, listening to Top of the Pops, the smash hits, getting a bit of a musical influence. Do you remember buying your first album or your single, or what that was?
Do you know, I mean, I could easily just make something up that's really cool. Yeah, first album I bought Marquee Moon and the Velvet Underground, I remember, with my pocket money when I was 9. That's a lie. I genuinely, the first time I remember buying is for myself with my own money. It was the Breakdance the Movie soundtrack.
Classic.
On tape. But I remember right from an early age, my brother and I would ask for albums and singles, and we'd work, because we're twins, obviously, who shared a birthday, we'd work out, right, well, if I ask for these 3 and you ask for those 3, then we had this sort of shared record collection up until we were sort of later teenagers, and then the gloves were off, and it's like, no, those are mine, those are yours. We sort of had a summit meeting where we divided it all up at one stage, and then sort of went our own ways. But the really early birthday presents were always 7-inch singles, and Christmas you might get a couple of albums.
Like I say on this podcast, there's no such thing as a guilty pleasure, just the pleasures that people have. Yeah. So this podcast is all about you collecting your fantasy festival, Danny. Are you a big fan of festivals? Do you like them? Do you go to many?
Yeah, I still, and now we're going with the kids as well, so they're getting dragged along. Yeah, obviously a lot more when I was younger, if I'm completely honest. But we still go to a lot of gigs. My wife and I, that's what we do for fun. We watch live music. So and the girls are, I've got two young, well, not so young, 16 and 13, and they come with it. We just went in the summer. We went to you had a truck festival in Oxford.
Oh, someone's mentioned that before on the podcast.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, the Kynd were playing there, and the girls came, and of course we dragged them along to watch us. And then Sam Fender was on in the evening, and they were off watching him. And then we went and saw some new bands together, which is really exciting. So a couple of bands I weren't really on my radar, but they knew of, like the Sports Team.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've seen that. Well, they got dragged there by my niece and 6-year-old daughter. And we were watching new bands together at a festival, which is something I think is amazing about festivals. You go there to see somebody, but on the way back you walk past another stage and you've discovered your new favourite band. And to do that with my kids now is obviously really exciting. So yes, I am a festival fan, and obviously like most people, but particularly as you get into your late 40s, the travelling, the rain, the sleeping on the hard ground becomes less attractive. But no, yeah, big fan. And I think it's just, the range of music and surprise bands you can find and enjoy is the beauty, isn't it?
I've got to ask about having a 16-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter. What are they like when you're on stage? Are they? I presume they're very supportive, but do they get embarrassed? They're like, oh, he's picked up the guitar again. He's gonna, or are they all right with it?
If I was completely honest, I'd like to say no. They think I'm really cool, but if I'm completely honest, it is a mixture of begrudging pride, I think, sometimes, and then embarrassment. So if in the right time, so when they've come in the summer, they watch us play at festivals. There's a load of people there. Obviously, not necessarily all to see us, but and they're in there with their wristbands on. Then they're loving it. But if I'm at home talking about it, or we have the lads come over or whatever, it's like, ugh. So there's a time and a place for it. So I've never caught them actually listening to our music, for example, but.
One day, I bet they're secretly got a guitar in their bedroom strumming away.
Well, actually, the younger one is she's got one of our guitars in her room now, and she's learning to play. So long may that continue.
Brilliant. You mentioned going to gigs with your wife. Do you have a favourite gig that you've been to, or is it too hard to kind of say there's a favourite?
Oh, so many. I mean, obviously, when you're going, you pick the bands you go and see, the bands you love, and generally we thoroughly enjoy them. No, so many over the years. We had, just before lockdown, my wife and I went to see a singer-songwriter called Lily Hyatt, who's over from Nashville. She's John Hyatt's daughter, who's a kind of what was a big name singer-songwriter in the 70s. And she's sort of a rocking Americana singer-songwriter, full band, Rickenbacker, and we went. It was just before lockdown. I don't think we realised it was going to be our last gig for a couple of years, and it was a tiny little venue in London. And she was absolutely amazing. We came back and we were really in, what a great night. And then sort of the next day it was lockdown, and that was that. So that sticks in my mind because it was our last gig for 2 years. But over time, sort of all-time favourites. I was at Ride at Brixton Academy when they were doing the Leave Them All Behind tour back in the day, and they did release a video of that, and it's sort of a classic gig, and that was amazing. I saw Blur at the Kilburn National when they, after Leisure but before Modern Life is Rubbish came out, so they played most of Leisure and Pop Scene and some of the tracks that went on to becoming Modern Life is Rubbish, was one of my favourite albums of all time, and that really sticks in my mind. But so many. I mean, I generally find something to enjoy at any gig.
Great stuff, as you should do. So, like I said at the top of the podcast, the aim of this is getting our guest tonight, which is Danny, so he gets to play his fantasy festival. So he gets to choose any 5 acts, one of who must play one of their studio albums in full, and Danny gets to pick an encore, which can be any song by any artist ever that all 5 of his acts can perform together at the end of his fantasy festival. So like I said at the beginning, I had the magic mod on in the last episode of the podcast. He collated Modfest, which was amazing. In his opening act, he had the Rifles, which is a great act to have. Super Seconds, he picked DMAs and had them play their Hills at End album in full. For his Midway Madness slot, he went for Small Faces. And his pre-headline act took everyone by surprise and picked Lonnie Donegan, which was a great shout. And this is the great thing about this podcast. You learn so many things about people. And we learned that Ben had named his son Lonnie after the infamous Lonnie Donegan, which was amazing. And I guess no surprise, his headline act was The Jam, which is probably an obvious one, but great to hear Ben talk about his passion for The Jam and Paul Weller. And for his encore, he picked Gimme Shelter and had his 5 acts play Gimme Shelter. So very simple, 5 acts take 5 time slots. But before we do that, Danny, got to give your fantasy festival a name, and we got to give it a venue. So, Danny, what are you going to call your fantasy festival?
Do you know what? I have put some thought into this, but not the name. So, I mean, we're going to call it Kynd Fest or Kynd Stock. Let's call it Kynd Stock.
Let's call it Kynd Stock with a Y.
Yeah. And then if I think of anything better before the end, we'll swap it out. And it's going to be in the field behind my house.
Oh, perfect.
Because, quite frankly, I don't want to have to travel.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to. How big's the field? Are we talking like...
Oh, no, it's relatively small, but this is... I don't want there to be tens of thousands of people there.
Amazing. I always feel like the smaller venues get overlooked for like the big venues in this. I would do it. It's very, very similar to you. Have it really close to my house in a small field so I don't have to go anywhere. So we've got Kynd Stock. It's going to take place in the field behind Danny's house. So Danny, you get to choose 5 acts. But before we do, are there any acts who you want to mention? You already spoke about some great acts already.
Yeah.
Who aren't going to get into the 5.
Yeah, some of the bands I mentioned are obviously going on the list. But there are. It's really difficult. This is what I really enjoyed about it, because 5 isn't enough, obviously, and that's what makes it fun. So, I mean, I've had to leave out Blur, which are one of, and as a band, they're sort of one of our all-time favourite bands, and I would have had them doing Modern Life in Rubbish in full, because there's quite a few songs on that album which they don't play live. When they do play, they don't play live. I've had to leave out REM, and I'd have loved, because I've picked bands from a certain period as well. I don't just want them from any period. I've picked bands and I want them, so that I'm picking REM. I would have picked REM from the 80s and their early albums. The Who would have been amazing live, but I'm pretty sure loads of people have picked the Who. And Big Star. Do you know Big Star?
Oh, Big Star, absolutely. Alex Chilton.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to see them play. And there's not a lot of footage of them playing, and they very, very nearly made it onto the list. And again, we're really the kind of a power pop band, and we don't sound like Big Star, but I love Big Star. And there's a band on my list that it sort of introduced us to Big Stars.
I was just going to say how I got into Big Star, and it was through another band. So I'm not going to tell you how I got into Big Star, because I might spoil it, but I might not. But we'll obviously come on to that when you talk about one of the bands. All right. So we've got Kynd Stock, sold out. It's a lovely day. Well, it's not even sold out if it's in the field behind your house. It'd be by invite only, by invite of Danny Tipping only. 2:00. Time for the opening act to take your stage in, Danny. So who's going to open Kynd Stock?
I'm going to have the Lars.
Great shout. I love the Lars. They've been spoken about quite a bit on the podcast, but Danny, you've not mentioned the Lars yet, so I guess why are you going to have the Lars at your fantasy festival?
So I deliberately tried to leave out a few, in our preamble. So we went to see the Lars, my brother and I. It was after There She Goes had come out originally. It was in Kentish Town, and I think the album had just come out. And basically, they played the whole album from start to finish. Well, they've only ever released one album, but obviously there's a lot of unreleased stuff. They played the whole album from start to finish, then came back on and did a couple songs from the album again. And it was obviously the original lineup with John Power still in the band, and they were just brilliant. And that album, the Lars, is just perfect from start to finish. And live, they did a bloody good, rendition of it. And I did go to see them when they reformed in the 2000s, but it wasn't quite the same. So I'm picking the Lars from that first album period, and I just have them go on, play those 11 songs or whatever it is, and that, what an amazing opener. The sun's up, you've had a couple of beers, and they come on and play that album, and that would be perfect for me.
Fantastic shout. I went to see the Lars when they got back together. I went to Shepherd's Bush Empire.
Yeah,
and that was good. I obviously was too young the first time around, but I really enjoyed seeing them then. I don't know if you've seen, Lee Mavers has been photographed out and about recording in the last couple of weeks, which is really interesting. So
I haven't seen that. I'd love to. I mean that, but even if, what's so amazing about that? There's other bands that have only done 1 or 2 albums. I'm saying, I wish they'd done more. But that's so perfect, that album, that it's almost that's enough. Do you know what I mean? If he never did anything again, it wouldn't matter, because it's brilliant.
I've been lucky enough to have Paul Hemmings on the podcast and Mike Badger, who were part of different lineups. And I remember, I think it was Mike Badger told me about the time Lee Mavers walks in with There She Goes, and he's like, I've got this riff and this idea. They're like, oh my goodness me, what is this? Do you know what I mean? It's unbelievable stuff. So Lars opening Kynd Stock. Only the second time they've been picked for a fantasy festival lineup. So they're back. They're playing from 2 till 3. We'll take a half-hour break, and that'll take us from 3:30 to 4:30. It'll be time for your Super Seconds act, Danny. So who are you going to have follow the Lars?
I'm going to have Teenage Fan Club. Again, absolutely brilliant band. They're brilliant live. If you haven't seen them, listeners, then you should. They're the band that sort of introduced us to Big Star as well, or introduced me at least. I don't know if the others knew about them, but they were sort of referenced in interviews and around the time Bandwagon S came out. But I'm going to have them play Grand Prix from start to finish.
Great show.
Which I think that, sort of like mid-afternoon set, they come on. There's an album of perfect guitar pop songs. There's not a Duff song on the album. And again, I want that Grand Prix lineup as well. So Jerry Love and the whole gang are back together doing that album. And I think that would go down really well as the cider starts kicking in.
Great choice for your Super Seconds act. So Teenage Fan Club, first time they've been picked for a fantasy festival. So after 120 episodes,
that's mental.
Everyone's, I guess, has got a different lineup, but it's always interesting to see people's reactions when you tell them how many times their choices have been picked. So my entree to Big Star was The Replacements, who had the song Alex Chilton, and then when I got into Ryan Adams, first of all, Ryan Adams was really always spoke about Big Star and the songwriting. So plenty of ways to get into Big Star. So even though Big Star haven't been chosen, I'm sure everyone's got Spotify. Go and have a listen to Big Star, because there's not much is there that they've done, but what they've done is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, you can't go wrong. So all their recorded output is amazing and worth checking out. So
yeah, absolutely. So Teenage Fan Club playing from 3:30 to 4:30. We're going to take a half-hour break. That takes us to 5 o'clock. That takes us to Midway Madness. So 2 acts down, 3 to go. So Danny, who's your Midway Madness act?
Well, this is going to be amazing, because I'm going to have Otis Redding backed by Booker T and the MGs.
Oh wow, that will be amazing. I guess my question is, Otis Redding's quite different from your first two choice. So why are we going to Otis Redding?
Well, because I just think it'd be really nice to break it up with you've got, and they're fairly gentle. The Lars and Teenage Fan Club, they're jangly guitar pop, lovely harmonies, great choruses and that, and you're just getting into the day, and then Otis comes on with Booker T and the MGs and knocks out Hard to Handle and Satisfaction and Respect and These Arms Are Mine, and just everybody, that's it, you're off then. You're dancing along, you're singing along. One of the best bands ever assembled, the Booker T and the MGs, and one of the greatest vocalists of all time, with a catalogue of hits. I mean, if he's playing, how long's his set?
Gets an hour.
Oof. There'll be an hour of absolute solid gold that would just get the crowd up on their feet. And again, we all love 60s soul music in the band as well. I mean, it's not, obviously you can't hear that in the Kynd's output, but we love 60s soul, and who does it better than Otis and Booker T and the MGs? So that's it. And I think it's just really nice in the middle of the day to get that, sing along crowd.
It's a great shout. It's a great shout. You might be surprised again. I'm quite surprised, actually. First time Otis Redding's been picked for a fantasy festival. I thought he was picked, actually, but it turns out he hasn't.
Who is it you're interviewing?
Do you know what? Many acts have been picked, but not Otis Redding before. But he joins the Fantastival Podcast roster, gets picked for the first time.
I thought I was being too obvious as well, because I actually decided not to be like all clever and try and go really out there and say, oh, this band you may not have heard of are from Australia in 1974. But so Lars, Teenage Fan Club, Otis Redding, I feel like I've done quite well not to. I thought they'd be picked a lot.
No, you've done very well there. So Midway Madness will certainly be Midway Madness with Otis Redding and Booker T and the MGs. We'll take one more half-hour break. That'll take us to 6:30. It'll be time for your pre-headline act. They're going to get an hour and a half to play. It's going to be quite tough to follow Otis Redding. So Danny, who are you going to have as your pre-headliners?
Well, something completely different, and I've mentioned them before, but I'd have Ride on next. So the sun's going down, and they come on and play Leave Them All Behind, and that's how they open up their set, and then they do a career-spanning set of Ride classics, ended with a cacophony of noise at the end to close out the set. But they're an amazing band live. I've seen them, at every point in their career, from sort of fairly early on in the 90s up until they broke up, and then several times since they've reformed, and they're just built to play live, that band. And I just think there's outdoors with a great sound system, and Ride going through their set would be absolutely brilliant at that time of night.
That would be a fantastic set. Might surprise you, it might not. First time Ride have been picked for Fantasy Festival. The fists are out. Yes, absolutely. Making history on the Fantastival Podcast. Ride have been spoken about quite a few times as influencing people, and what people have been listening to have been mentioned quite a few times. They've missed acts, but obviously tonight they make it in. They're going to play for an hour and a half at Kynd Stop, make their Fantastival debut. So 4 great acts. We're going to take one more half-hour break. That'll take us to 8:30, and we have one more act to reveal. Your headliners, we're going to play from 8:30 to 11. So Danny, who's going to headline Kynd Stop?
Well, again, there was lots of other contenders, but at the end of the day, it's as a band, it's our favourite band. They're the biggest band that ever were and ever will be. And I would, if genuinely you gave me the power to see one band, it would be the Beatles. And there's no point. I've got to be completely. It would be the Beatles. There'd be like the 1968 version of the Beatles, Billy Preston would be on keyboards. It would be a set culled from the latter half of their career. I've jotted down a set list, but obviously there'd be elements of the rooftop concert, but there'd be elements of their last gig at Candlestick Park where they played things like Day Tripper and Paperback Writer, and wouldn't that be amazing? The sun's gone down, the Beatles come on stage, and they kick into Paperback Writer, and then you're away for an hour and a half of classic rock and roll by the greatest band that ever were and ever will be.
That's a great shout.
And I'm sure they've been picked lots of times before, but I'm very specifically have in mind the period that they're from and what they're going to play.
So 120 episodes in, this is the sixth time they've been picked. I thought they'd be picked.
Well, I think people avoid, they don't want to be too obvious, but
possibly.
I don't care.
You've got to be true to yourself, Danny. The Beatles are headlining Kynd make their sixth appearance. It's going to be a great 2.5 hours. They're going to play to 11 o'clock for us, and at 11 o'clock, they bring back on stage Ride, Otis Redding, backed by Booker T and the MGs, Teenage Fan Club, and the Lars, and they're all on your stage in the field behind your garden, and they're all going to play whatever song you tell them to play, Danny.
Well, the Beatles aren't going to leave the stage. They're going to be joined by these bands, and they're going to play Tomorrow Never Knows, and it's going to be about 17 minutes long. Can you imagine the Beatles and Ride and Teenage Fan Club and the Lars playing Tomorrow Never Knows with their heads down and a mental light show? And that'd probably finish me off. I'd probably just evaporate at the end of it.
That is an awesome way to end an awesome fantasy festival. So let's lock it in then. So until we lock it in, you can still change your mind. So we have got Kynd, which I think is a pretty good name, actually. I think we should probably leave it at Kynd, unless you thought of anything better. I think Kynd's fine. Taking place in the field behind Danny's house. Opening act, we've got the Lars, followed by Teenage Fan Club, who are going to play Grand Prix in full. Midway Madness, we've got Otis Redding, backed by Booker T and the MGs. Pre-headliners, we've got Ride, and headlining your fantasy festival, we've got the Beatles, and for your encore, all 5 acts are going to play Tomorrow Never Knows. Danny, that sounds like a great fantasy festival to me. You happy to sort that one into our Fantastival vaults?
Yeah, 100%. I'd like the second stage with REM, Blur, Big Star and The Who on, but other than that, I'm very happy with that lineup.
Great stuff. We'll see if Kynd 2 happens one day, then maybe we'll get the rest of them in there, seeing how...
I think we'd have spent all the money on Kynd 1, wouldn't we?
Absolutely. So, Danny, we've spoken about kind of the album coming out, but what does 2023 look like? I guess what are your hopes for 2023, and what does it look like for?
I presume you mean for the band as opposed to just in life.
We can say both.
Obviously, we just really at the moment we're just really focused on. We can't wait for people to hear the album. We're really happy with it. That's out mid-March, and then there'll be another single or 2 from the album. It's going to be like Bad. Michael Jackson released like 9 singles off the album. It's a big template for us. The mid-period Michael Jackson stuff. And some gigs over the summer, some festivals and a few shows. But we're just after all this time, we're just very, very grateful that anybody's paying any interest at all. So we're just taking it one step at a time. But going to get the album out, play a few shows, and just look forward to people hearing it.
So let's plug the album in. So timelines, it comes out on Friday, the 10th of March. You can pre-order it on Bandcamp, which is quite easy to find, Kynd. And then I guess, is it going to be available to stream on the 10th as well, or is it being held back?
All the usual places you'll be able to stream it for free. But obviously, we'd love people to go and pick up the album. It's a really nice package, actually. The artwork's been done by, I don't know if you've ever seen Stuff by Mark on Twitter or Instagram. If you put Stuff by Mark Reynolds, his name is, a brilliant artist that does a lot of sort of pop art inspired by classic bands, and he's done the artwork for us, and it's a really nice package. It's, as I say, it's produced by Barno Shaughnessy, who worked with Primal Scream and Denim and Dodgy and just everybody, and mastered by a guy called Barry Grint, who did all the Oasis albums and Liam's stuff, and worked with Madonna and REM and just the works. And so it looks and sounds great. And as I say, it's a very limited edition vinyl release, and CDs available on Bandcamp. But we just have, if people stream it and give it a listen and like it, we're happy either way.
Good stuff. And one last shout out for your social media then. So if you don't follow the Kynd, you can find the Kynd on Twitter, Insta, TikTok as well.
I think we're on TikTok. Yeah, we're definitely on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Spotify. So definitely, give us a follow there. Come and say hello. And if anybody's around and about in London on the 9th of March, we're playing at 93 Feet East on Brick Lane, which is a great venue. We used to go and see a lot of gigs in the late 90s and early noughties. So we're really pleased that we're back there to celebrate the launch of Timelines.
Sure to be one hell of an evening. So that is it, everyone. Thank you for listening to the 120th episode of the Fantastival Podcast. And if you've enjoyed this one, please subscribe and give the Fantastival Podcast a review on iTunes. Or if you're listening on Spotify, you can go and rate the show, which will be highly appreciated. As well as the Kynd being on social media, so is the Fantastival Podcast. We are on Twitter. You can find us at FantastivalP, and we are also in the early stages of a TikTok page, but I haven't got my head around it, if I'm being completely honest yet. So maybe we'll do more on it, but at the moment we're on it, but not doing much on it. Because it's a podcast, we can't play music, but I'll get some tracks from Danny, from his chosen artists. We'll make a nice little Spotify playlist, put that in the episode description. So if you're unfamiliar with any of the acts who Danny has spoken about, we'll get some tracks on there for you to listen to. So Danny, a massive thank you for coming on to the podcast. You're my 120th guest. You've put 3 new acts into the Fantastival Podcast vault. How have you found it? Because obviously you're in a band. This has been like a solo mission for you. How have you found it flying solo and being on the pod?
Well, if you'd have got Paul and Tristan on as well, we'd still be talking and we wouldn't have agreed on 5 bands. But they're as big, if not bigger, music fans than I am. So it would have been an interesting discussion. No, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love talking about music, and I've listened to your podcast, and you obviously love music as well. And I could do this. This is the sort of thing I'd be doing in the pub every night. So this is we waste a lot of band meetings doing this sort of thing. So absolute pleasure, mate. And very happy to be part of it.
Great stuff, and best of luck with the album. I look forward to listening to it when it comes out on Friday the 10th of March. Best of luck for the future with that one. So I'll be back next week with episode 121. So please make sure to join me. But until then, stay safe, my Fantastival friends. Please continue to spread the word. And that word is Fantastival. Thanks for listening.